Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run through the latest weather warnings as we've seen numerous upgrades to the wind warnings that have been issued later on this week, as that system that we have been looking at in a lot of detail over the past few days has finally now been named. Storm Irwin is going to be arriving as we head through Friday into Saturday, and it is looking likely to bring at least 80 to 90 miles per hour across many parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and there is a small risk still of seeing winds in excess of 100, maybe even up to 110 miles per hour for some of those west-facing coastal areas. We'll look at that in detail on the latest UKV, looking at the precipitation, temperature and wind gusts over the coming days as we are slowly deteriorating through this week. It is still fairly mundane out there, chilly and settled for most, but it is slowly deteriorating before that big storm arrives on Friday. And I know yesterday we saw the UKV was way over the top with some of its wind gusts. It has scaled it back a little bit today, but it is still showing in excess of 100 miles per hour, not the 120 we saw yesterday. So still really extreme, but just not quite sort of ridiculous sort of images we were seeing yesterday. And then we'll finish the video by having a completely longer range to see what is in store for the rest of January and start of February. Because of course we've got Storm Irwin moving through on Friday, but only if we got this system, there's a risk of further storms into next week. At the moment, still a lot of discrepancies between the runs, but lots of pretty severe systems are cropping up. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw even a second or third storm system named next week. But that's still a little bit in the longer term, and we'll look at that in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. And remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now if you start on the live radar, you can see at the moment not too much is going on. We do have some patches of lighter rain and this sort of string of on and off rain and thick cloud across Northern England and Wales. Now this is kind of a weak weather front that is moving through as we are slowly lowering in pressure as that high pressure that has dominated the last week or so is now finally subsiding away. It's still pretty chilly, upper air temperatures are still below average, and at the surf it's still very cold with an inversion taking place. Frosts still potentially there throughout the next few days, but eventually, as I said, towards Friday we do see some drastic shifts as we do see that huge storm system moving in. Now you may be wondering, why are we seeing such a severe storm system after a pretty dry and mundane middle third to January? It's been cold but reasonably settled, not too much rain, just a bit of fog and frost. Now, the reason for that is if we go out to North America. Now, I'm assuming lots of people here have been seeing what's going on, of course, in Washington with the inauguration, and how that was moved indoors because of the extreme cold. Now, that extreme cold is part of a really big plunge of polar vortex that has been impacting much of northern, southern, and eastern America. And you can see at the moment, we're even seeing a major winter storm across the south coast of the United States, down towards Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. So right where we see some hurricanes during the summer, we're seeing significant snow. These areas can get cold, but not normally this cold and not normally with this extent of snow. You can see even out to the Gulf of Mexico we're seeing some snow falling. So yeah, ridiculous cold plunge at the moment. And I can't say it's this exact system, but the remnants of this and sort of part of these low pressure systems forming along this cold and warm boundary that is powering the jet stream over the next couple of days and is firing that low pressure system towards us. And that's where we see Storm Irwin spawn through Thursday and Friday. So it's all due to this massive cold plunge is why we are going so unsettled. Now, if you look at the temperatures for UK at the moment, it's still chilly. Lots of blues and lighter blues indicating temperatures low single digits, if not towards freezing. Not quite as cold as it was, of course, last week or even in the prior few days and sort of through the weekend, but still very chilly, especially in those areas where we're avoiding the rain as that weak weather front does move in. It's still going to remain cold through much of this week. The only respite we get is actually when Storm Irwin arrives. Between the weather fronts, we are going to be sat in a mild wedge, so we could actually get up to double digits for a few hours on Friday afternoon, but then it will drop much colder into the weekend as we do see a blast of polar maritime air moving through as that comes in on the backside of these low pressure systems. Again, the same air that is hitting the United States at the moment. You could see this massive cold plunge, of course, The northern states are quite used to getting temperatures well below freezing, but you can see it is widespread across much of northern and eastern United States. And you can see, look at the temperature clash. Down towards Miami, we're looking at mid to high 20s. Towards the north of Florida, not getting much above freezing. And you can see Louisiana there, New Orleans, absolutely freezing. So ridiculous temperature contrast we're seeing at the moment as a result of this big plunge, as we've seen a low polar vortex exit out of the Arctic. And it's just forming this big area of low pressure, and that's going to really be powering the jet stream, this temperature contrast over the coming days. So it's setting the scene for the exceptionally stormy weather that we are seeing later on this week. Now, to go over to the weather warnings, we do actually have warnings issued for Wednesday for fog. Again, we won't look at these in too much detail, but again, we're looking at potentially below 100 metres of visibility, and you can see all linked here, these same warnings. So do keep an eye out for that fog through Wednesday morning. Could be pretty thick and dangerous in places. I was out earlier today, and 1 minute it's clear skies, blue skies, looks actually pretty nice, and the next minute you're in a bit of a fog patch, whether you go down into a slight valley or something. So it can come on very quickly, so do stay safe out there, and these areas have been highlighted as being higher risk there through Wednesday morning. But if we do go over to the main event now, you can see we've got multiple separate wind warnings issued at the moment. We've got this combined wind warning for much of northern Scotland and much of England and Wales, down towards the south and southwest coastal areas for Storm Irwin for the full 24 hours of Friday. Unsure why they've split it like this. Thought it would just be better to issue separate warnings because the timings are going to be different. But at the moment, a blanket warning. Suspect this will be updated as we do get nearer to the event. We're looking at 50 to 60 inland, 60 to 70 along some coastal hills, and perhaps 80 towards parts of western Scotland and perhaps elsewhere as well. At the moment, medium impact and low likelihood, and you can see the warning area has been expanded across a large part of the UK and has been superseded by a high impact warning across Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England and north and west Wales. So kind of losing that mid bit of that warning so it can be separated so we can see more severe impacts here. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens to these warnings, but I suspect amber warnings could be issued within this initial yellow warning. And this main yellow warning across central areas where we've got high impact but very low likelihood, I do think there's a possibility of seeing, again, widespread amber, if not red warnings, as we are looking at, again, 60 to 70 inland, 80 to 90 along coasts and hills, and perhaps even higher than that's already opened the door up for 100 plus miles per hour. So a really severe system moving in. The only thing holding it back from seeing these upgrades and warnings, as you can see, is just the likelihood, because we are still 3-4 days away from this storm properly arriving. At the moment, the only areas that don't look like they're going to be massively impacted is kind of central and eastern England. Again, still suspect winds will get up to kind of 40-50 miles per hour here. Those gusts will still be pretty strong, but just nowhere near as strong as further northwards and westwards. And then finally into Saturday, we've got a widespread wind warning for much of Scotland until 3 p.m. on Saturday. Again, we're looking at medium impact and very low likely. It does impact a few spots of northern England as well. So again, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But again, similar amounts, anywhere from around 50 to 80 miles per hour. But as I said, these warnings are preliminary. Really see these ramped up and they'll be refined through Wednesday and Thursday, as we are still a good few days away. And there still is some uncertainty within the runs. But the UKV is pretty exemplary today from the runs I've seen. I've had a quick flick through some of the high resolution runs. Not going to show them all because we are still getting quite a lot of discrepancies in them, and that's something we'll probably do either tomorrow or Thursday, looking at more of those high resolution runs, looking at those wind gusts. But I had a flick through them, and the UKV is kind of in the middle. It's not the strongest, it's not the weakest, and positioning wise it is kind of in the middle as well, because some are further out to sea, some runs are further inland. Now, if you run through it the coming days, you can see not too much going on. A bit of heavy rain there in the far southeast into Wednesday morning. Again, we're not looking at anything too major, but it could become a little bit widespread for a time. That eventually clears, and for much of Wednesday, we're pretty dry and with some sunshine breaking through. Into Thursday, start to see some heavier rain pushing in, and this is the signs of those unsettled conditions moving in. Now, this is not Storm Irwin. This is just a weather front associated with that dropping pressure. And then look what happens through Thursday into Friday. A bit of snow, perhaps, across some of the higher ground of Scotland. And then Storm Irwin arrives. This big hook of a weather front. And again, some heavy snow on its leading edge. Possibility there, some big evaporative cooling. So I wouldn't be surprised to even see yellow warnings for snow issued. And then through much of Friday, exceptionally unsettled. We're not looking at a massive rainfall event. There could be yellow warnings issued just because of the intensities could be high at times. But the weather front does move through pretty quickly in the space of about 6 to 9 hours for most, dropping maybe as much of an inch of rain, which is still a lot of rain, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to what some of these storms can produce, it isn't actually all too much. This does look like a mainly wind event. It does clear, and then we see lots of heavy showers packing into western Scotland, and it's on this southern flank here through Friday afternoon, where many areas in the south go much clearer. This is where we could see those exceptionally strong winds, 100 miles per hour look like a real possibility. And then we see this really strong westerly flow moving in, but it's all of that cold air that's sat across the United States. Now, of course, it's been heavily moderated by the time it gets to our shores, but nonetheless, it could allow a bit of snow within this weather front in the far southeast, lots of snow showers further northwards and westwards, and just generally lots of mixing and colder conditions there into the weekend, and eventually another storm system arriving there Sunday into Monday. Not looking quite as intense, but still pretty severe, and we'll have a look at the wind gusts in a minute, but still getting up towards yellow or even amber warning territory with this secondary system here. Now, if you look at the mean sea level pressure, I can still see we're kind of floating between high pressure, low pressure at the moment as we slowly see it dropping away, and eventually through Thursday we see that initial low pressure system moving in. Pretty deep, 978 millibars out toward the west of Scotland, but nothing too crazy compared to Friday. And if we look at Friday, look at this system moving in, down towards kind of 950 millibars. Of course, we saw down towards 936 millibars yesterday. And I did say that was probably slightly overdone. There are still runs showing that sort of intensity, but I'll explain now why we're not seeing that from this UKV run. And it's all due to the fact that this system is much closer to land than it was yesterday. The centre of the storm actually passes through parts of the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, whereas the system yesterday stayed more out to sea. And that essentially means that it's able to deepen a little bit more significantly, and therefore those winds will be stronger. So in this case, the winds are slightly weaker than yesterday, as I've said, maybe still up to 100, 110, but not 120 plus. But the wind field does cover more land area. So even though the most significant impacts, the most severe winds will be lower, the widespread nature will actually be higher. So it's kind of laying off the two different sides. We see perhaps more widespread impactful conditions, but those impacts could be slightly lower for the most severe spots. So yeah, it's the kind of the lesser of two evils here we're looking at. So yeah, don't really know exactly what will happen as it all depends on the positioning of the low. But yeah, at the moment, we're thinking around 940, 950 millibars for the centre of this system, all dependent on where it sits. But you can see on its southern flank where those winds are the strongest, you can see the very tight isobars there. Exceptionally strong winds for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and Northern England. And this is where I suspect we could see widespread amber, if not red warnings issued. And eventually that next system arrives there into Sunday, perhaps down to 960 millibars as that system does arrive. Now, if you look at the wind gusts, you can see as we head into Friday, winds picking up into Thursday afternoon, but then they properly pick up there into Friday. We're looking at widely 50 to 70 miles per hour, and then on that southern flank, we're looking at widely 80 to 90, and then up towards 100, especially towards those coastal regions. And you can see even inland, we're looking at widely 80 to 90 within that Northern Ireland, Northern England, and southern Scotland kind of areas. So I suspect here we will see an amber, if not red warning issued. It is looking really vicious, this system. Storm Irwin eventually does clear, but still leaves 70, 80 miles per hour into Friday evening. And you see further southwards, winds will still be strong, but they're much briefer and nowhere near as widespread. And then eventually into the weekend, it settles down for a time. And then into Sunday, the next system arrives, and although not quite as strong, still looking at 60 to 70 widely, up towards 80, and perhaps could be more impactful further south as well, as this system is pushed slightly further southwards than Storm Irwin. You see, the upper air temperatures are actually very cold behind Storm Irwin, and that's because we are pulling in a really cold polar maritime air mass. The same air that, as I said, is across North America at the moment is getting pushed all the way across the Atlantic, heavily moderated. It probably increases by about 10 to 15 degrees at 850 HPA in the space of 24 hours, so rapid warming, but it's still cold by the time it reaches our shores. Dew points hovering around freezing. As I said, there is the possibility of a bit of winteriness, and the temperatures will generally be pretty cold. Into Wednesday morning, temperatures dropping down towards freezing in a few spots, but mostly low single digits and very little diurnal range there into Wednesday afternoon, 4 to 7 degrees. Into Thursday, another frost potentially during the morning, and then into the afternoon again. Not too much change, 3 to 7 degrees, still pretty chilly. Not as cold as I said the first kind of 10 or 12 days of January was, but still chilly, still much colder than I think people would like it to be. Into Friday, we wake up to potentially another frost in a few spots, but very quickly that gets pushed away from the west. Actually, for southern and western regions, by Friday morning, it's actually getting up towards the double digits. And it's double digits for the afternoon for quite a few in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. However, Scotland remains very cold, where we could continue to see some snow, especially over the higher ground. And then eventually through Friday evening, that polar maritime air pulls back in, and we all go very cold through Friday evening into Saturday morning. Widespread frost in northern and western areas, and then by Saturday afternoon, hardly getting above about 2 to 6 degrees, maybe a 6, 7 or 8 in a few isolated spots, but still very cold. And the same can be said for Sunday, very chilly for the morning, and then pretty cold in the afternoon once again, kind of 3 to 7 degrees, with it being much colder across Scotland. So although, yes, we are seeing a westerly wind moving in and is turning very stormy, which we normally associate with a mild southwesterly, because of the origins of this storm coming all the way from North America, being spawned by these huge temperature clashes across the United States, we've actually got a lot of cold air involved. Although heavily moderated, still very cold, and it does mean that through this weekend and later this week in general, it is going to be pretty chilly. Nowhere near as cold as the start of the month, but still very chilly, below average, and it does increase the risk of even a bit of winteriness mixing in with these storm systems. Now, to finish the video, but have a look at the longer range charts. Of course, concentrating really on those shorter range charts because of that storm on Friday. But of course, it's good to keep on top with what is going on. You can see that big lobe of polar vortex is exiting out of North America at the moment, and you can see it spawns this low pressure system along its southern flank, and that is Storm Irwin. As I said, it's not the exact same low pressure system across southern America at the moment producing heavy snow in those southern states, but it's that similar sort of pattern. It's that similar conveyor belt is producing those same systems, and perhaps even the remnants of that are within this low here. That smashes the northern and western areas, and again, if we do zoom in, you can see it's deeper than the UKV, and the reason for that is it's slightly more out to shore. The centre here doesn't go through land, so instead it's slightly deeper, 944 millibars, and if we look at those wind gusts, you can see again, we're looking at 160, 170 kilometers per hour, so that's getting up to 100 miles per hour, and you can see the actual wind gusts are slightly stronger further southwards, so the isobars are slightly tighter further southwards here, so the wind gusts, that sort of peak wind gust area is slightly further southwards, so that's something to keep an eye on. Beyond that, the system eventually clears, and then we see that next low potentially arrive there through Sunday into Monday. Not as quick in progression here from the latest GFS, so perhaps not as severe, but then another system moves through Monday, so it just remains very unsettled. May not be named, but still would be really quite horrible. As we head into next week, continue to stay very unsettled, and eventually the GFS builds a Scandinavian high, and we've seen this numerous times for the runs over the past few days, but it never gets within the 10-day time frame. But seeing a Scandinavian high and seeing some pretty cold easterly winds moving in, persistent here for the start of February. A real battle against the polar vortex towards Greenland and Canada, but it is having a good go, and it actually does turn us pretty cold at the surface. We look at those 2 metre temperatures, you see for much of the UK we are low single digits. It would be very chilly with that easterly flow, but nowhere near a beast and east or anything like that, and that's because the high pressure can't get anywhere near as far north as it would need to be, and it can't drag in that easterly flow. So GFS trying to hint at a Scandi high there in the longer term, but to be honest, not having too much success. If you do look at the latest GM, again, broadly very similar. Storm Irwin moves through there on Friday, and again, if we do zoom in, the system is sat more out in the North Atlantic, and again down towards 946 millibars towards its centre. Looking again at those wind gusts, we're looking at well in excess of 150 to 160. Lots of numbers appearing there, so it is a little bit muddled. But those darker reds are towards that 100 mile per hour mark. So severe system, pretty similar track to the UKV in terms of its strongest winds, but generally the low is much further north, so perhaps more impacts there for parts of central, eastern and northern Scotland. Beyond that, we do see that next low pressure system arrive there into Monday. Perhaps not a wind event, but perhaps more of a rain event. We'll have to wait and see. The details for that, it all depends on its progression. It does look like a pretty complex system. It's got multiple low pressure systems developing all at once, so yeah, could be really lively there early next week, and then eventually just remains unsettled. Pressure slowly rising to our north and our east, which is trying to block out these Atlantic lows, but not having too much success as of yet, and it remains fairly chilly and fairly unsettled. And if we finally finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, this is the midday run. Actually not had a look at it yet because it only has just come out. Again, Storm Irwin arriving there into Friday, and if we do zoom in, wow, that is severe. 944 millibars towards the centre of its low. Again, if we look at the wind gusts, unfortunately not loading, but it would be very similar to the other runs. Very similar pressure level, and you can see it just passing through to the north of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland into parts of Scotland, just being offshore. This could probably be the most severe run there, getting that deepening of being out to sea, but also having a very widespread wind field there. Eventually clearing, and then seeing a next system there potentially on Monday or Sunday into Monday, but it does weaken rapidly on approach, so perhaps not quite as severe, and then eventually just stays very unsettled all the way to day 10. And again, Scandi High trying to build in there at day 10, trying to pull in easterly winds, but if we're being completely honest, it's not having much success. Now, if we finally finish by having a look at the latest ensembles, these are the latest GFS, very up and down over the coming days, pretty typical of a westerly flow, but lots of cold air mixing in as a result of all of that cold air across North America getting shoved that way by the jet stream. Lots of up and down precipitation. Remember, we are looking at London here, and London's probably going to be one of the most least affected from all these storm systems, as they are initially further north and westwards, but we could be more southerly focused next week, so that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, generally very unsettled, are really quite horrible. Sea level pressure, we see that dip there on Friday. That is Storm Irwin, much more pronounced in the north, as we'll see in a minute, but that system on Monday to Tuesday, much more apparent in parts of southern and eastern England. So although London, eastern England, maybe even most of the south coast could get away without seeing the most severe impacts from Irwin, need to keep an eye on Monday and Tuesday. It looks like another very lively system could move through. Maybe not quite as intense as Irwin, but it will be focused further southwards. 2 metres temperatures, pretty chilly, very up and down, mostly those single digits. And if we do compare to Glasgow, lots more precipitation, and a very up and down precipitation temperature chart there. And that's because if we look at the sea level pressure at midday, look at this, widely 940 to 960 millibars, exceptionally deep area of low pressure. And of course, we're not expecting the low to travel directly through Glasgow. It's going to be close, and then a couple of runs have it through, going through that central belt, but most have it slightly further westwards and northwards. So yeah, could be exceptionally severe here, and you see the 10-metre winds, big spikes appearing there for Friday, really out of the ordinary compared to this ensemble chart. So yeah, looking really quite awful there. And finally, if we look at the latest ECMWF, broadly very similar, very unsettled, and temperatures hovering in and around average. Sea level pressure, again, that big dip there into Friday. And if we do compare to London, for those ECMWF charts, very similar to the GFS. Again, unsettled, lots of up and downs. And again, as we head into Monday and Tuesday, we could see a slightly more severe system there for southern parts. So looking really quite horrible over the coming days. Not too bad the next 48 hours, but come Thursday afternoon onwards, it's going to be very unsettled, very stormy, of course, with that named Storm Irwin now on Friday. Although we only got yellow warnings issued at the moment, which may not sound too bad. I'm expecting amber warnings to be upgraded within the next sort of day or so, and I think there is a fairly strong chance we do see a red warning. Simply from the looks of these latest runs, it looks exceptionally deep with a very large wind field and intense wind field. Sometimes we can see these 100-mile-per-hour storms, but those wind fields are very small, very isolated for rural areas or areas with very low population. Instead, we just see yellow or amber. But in this case, it's such a large wind field touching so many areas, I do think a red warning will be issued. But I think that won't come into force, or won't be issued probably until Wednesday or Thursday. So we've still got another day or two to wait. But of course, I'll keep you updated. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.